I never thought I'd be posting here, but I've hit a point where my own head isn't a safe place to be. I need some outside eyes. My wife Sophie and I have been together for almost a decade. From the outside we looked solid: Sunday brunches, framed photos from mountain hikes, a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon because she loves baking. Friends called us the low-drama couple. I believed that, too, until a few months ago. It started with little things. Sophie suddenly got very into retail therapy. She'd head to the mall after work, claiming she just needed to de-stress. But the bags she brought home never quite matched the stories about sales or errands. Sometimes the tags were from stores she'd sworn she hadn't visited. Then came her phone. She used to leave it face up on the counter, but lately she'd keep it in a death grip, angling the screen away whenever a notification popped up. And when she laughed at messages, it wasn't the warm, full laugh I knew. It was sharper, almost giddy, like she was 16 again and texting a crush. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe she was planning a surprise or chatting with friends. Still, a quiet fracture had appeared behind her smile, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Last Saturday Sophie suggested we hit the mall. She said she needed a few basics. I figured it was harmless and went along, glad to get out of the house. Everything felt normal at first. We grabbed coffee, wandered through a few stores. Then she headed into a boutique and told me to just chill while she tried on a dress. I parked myself on a bench outside the fitting rooms, scrolling my phone. That's when I heard it. A low whisper, soft but clear, drifting from behind a half-closed curtain. I can't stop thinking about last night, Evan. Not me. Evan. My stomach dropped. I stayed frozen, listening. Sophie giggled, a sound I hadn't heard in years, and murmured something about later if we get a chance. For a second I convinced myself she was talking on the phone. But when I risked a glance, I saw a man's shoes just visible on the other side of the curtain. He shifted closer, her voice dropped even lower. I backed away before she could see me, pulse racing so hard it felt like a drum in my ears. The rest of the trip passed in a blur. She emerged a few minutes later, holding a dress and acting breezy. I managed to smile, but every word felt brittle in my mouth. That night, I couldn't shake the image of those shoes under the fitting room door. I replayed her tone, tender, secret, and felt the first real spike of dread. This wasn't retail therapy. It was something I wasn't supposed to hear. I lasted 2 days before I broke. Pretending everything was fine felt like trying to hold back a tide with my hands. Sophie was humming in the kitchen, slicing limes for the gin she'd suddenly taken to drinking after work. I stood there, heart hammering, and finally blurted, "Who's Evan?" Her knife paused mid-slice. She looked up, one eyebrow cocked. "Excuse me?" "I heard you in the fitting room," I said. "You weren't on the phone. You were talking to someone, Evan." For a beat, her face stayed perfectly neutral. Then she laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Oh my God, Mark, you've gone completely paranoid. Evan's a stylist at the store. He was giving me tips through the curtain." I wanted to believe her, but the picture didn't fit, the giggle, the way she'd whispered last night. "A stylist doesn't talk about last night," I said quietly. Her smile hardened. "Do you have any idea how crazy you sound? Standing outside fitting rooms, eavesdropping?" She shook her head, grabbed her drink, and stalked into the living room. "You need a hobby, Mark. Seriously." I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the lime halves. Her words didn't sting the way she meant them to, they just rang false. Somewhere under the irritation in her voice was a flicker of panic she couldn't quite hide. For the first time, I felt certain, whatever she was keeping from me wasn't small, and I wasn't done asking. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every word from our fight. Sophie slept beside me like nothing had happened, her breathing steady, one hand curled under her cheek. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this alone while lying next to someone. I kept hearing her voice in the fitting room, soft, warm, completely unlike the sharp tone she used with me lately. And then the way she turned the confrontation around, making me feel unhinged for even asking. By morning, I felt hollowed out. I made coffee and sat at the table while she breezed through the kitchen humming, phone in hand, like we were a couple in an ad for happiness. Not a single mention of Evan. Not even a fake apology for snapping at me. The longer she acted normal, the more I started questioning myself. Maybe I was overreacting? Maybe the shoes belonged to another shopper? But the memory of her laughter, that secret softness, kept cutting through every rationalization. I realized then that the real damage wasn't only the possibility she was cheating. It was how easily she'd made me doubt my own senses. I felt like a stranger inside my own life, pacing a house that suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I decided I couldn't sit still. I needed the truth, even if it hurt. So I grabbed my keys that afternoon and drove aimlessly, trying to plan my next move. Somewhere between the traffic lights, a grim calm settled over me. I couldn't keep waiting for Sophie to hand me honesty. I'd have to find it myself. By Tuesday, the hollow feeling had hardened into resolve. I was done letting Sophie's half-smiles and gaslighting keep me guessing. If she wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd have to collect it myself. That evening she said she was meeting Jenna for a quick dinner. I kissed her cheek, told her to have fun, and waited until I heard her car back out of the driveway. Then I went to work. First stop, her tote bag. Buried under a scarf was a receipt from a small cafe near the mall, dated the same day as our shopping trip. 2 cappuccinos, a slice of lemon tart, and 1 espresso. No sign of Jenna's name scribbled anywhere. Next, I carefully checked the inside pocket of her coat and found a slim, unfamiliar phone. My pulse spiked as I unlocked it. No passcode, a rookie mistake. Messages lit up the screen. Evan, same table Thursday? Can't wait. Sophie, yes. Let's not linger this time. I snapped quick photos of every message, then tucked the phone exactly as I'd found it. Later that week, when she said she was running errands, I drove to that cafe and parked across the street. Sure enough, she walked in, scanned the room, and smiled when a man in a gray jacket stood to greet her. They leaned in close, their hands touching as if by accident. I didn't go inside, not yet. I needed to be sure, to have more than a receipt and a few texts. But as I sat there watching them laugh over coffee, I knew the shape of the truth. I just had to decide how far I was willing to go to confirm it. By Thursday I'd reached the end of the rope. My screenshots, the cafe receipt, the memory of that fitting room whisper, they all circled my head like crows. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work. Even music in the car sounded hollow. I knew that if I didn't confront the truth soon, I'd start unraveling completely. That afternoon Sophie floated through the kitchen, scrolling her phone while humming some pop tune. She looked radiant, hair smooth, nails fresh, a faint scent of a new perfume drifting from her scarf. When she said she was heading out to run to the mall for a quick return, my gut clenched. I'd been waiting for this opening. I gave her a 20-minute head start, then followed. Her car led me straight to the little cafe near the shopping center. From where I parked, I watched her through the big window. She wasn't there to return anything. She was sitting at the same table, laughing with the man I glimpsed in the fitting room. Evan. He reached across the table, brushed a crumb from her cheek, and she caught his fingers with hers. They looked like a couple who belonged together, easy, comfortable. Like we used to be. I snapped a photo with my phone, hands shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I felt lightheaded. I could have stayed there forever, but something inside finally snapped. I got out, walked across the street, and stepped inside before I could second-guess myself. The bell over the door jingled. Sophie looked up, her smile freezing mid-laugh. Evan dropped his hand back to the table, eyes darting between us. Mark, she said, voice too bright. What are you doing here? I might ask you the same thing, I said, louder than I meant. The whole cafe seemed to hush. Sophie stood, smoothing her skirt as if tidying herself could erase the scene. This isn't what it looks like, she began, her tone already slipping into that familiar, sharp-edged annoyance. Evan's just helping me pick a gift for you. A gift, I repeated. I held up my phone, the photo of their clasped hands glowing on the screen. Looks more like date night. Her expression hardened. You've been spying on me? Following me around? Do you hear yourself? This is controlling, Mark. Evan muttered something about giving us space and slid out of the booth, leaving Sophie standing there, jaw tight, eyes flashing. She turned back to me, voice dropping to a hiss. You're embarrassing yourself. I wanted to yell, to demand every detail, but the room spun. I realized everyone was staring, baristas frozen mid-pour, a couple pausing mid-bite. My anger collapsed under a wave of humiliation and grief. All I could manage was, why, Sophie? After everything? For a heartbeat, her mask slipped a flicker of guilt, maybe even sadness. Then it was gone. She shrugged, lips curling into a bitter half-smile. Maybe I got tired of waiting for you to notice me. I left before the tears could come, the bell above the door clanging as I pushed out into the cool air. Rain had started, thin and cold, soaking through my jacket as I walked to the car. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring at the cafe's glowing windows until Sophie and Evan blurred into silhouettes. That was the moment I knew the marriage we'd built was gone. I couldn't unknow what I'd just seen, couldn't patch over the raw edges of her lies. Something inside me, a mix of heartbreak and clarity, finally settled. Whatever came next, I wasn't going back to pretending. I sat in the car outside that cafe for a long time, watching rain beat and slide down the windshield. Inside, Sophie and Evan were silhouettes through fogged glass, bent close as if nothing had happened. My hands gripped the wheel so hard the leather creaked. When I finally drove away, I didn't head home right away. I circled aimlessly through quiet streets, trying to make sense of what I'd just lived through. The humiliation burned worst, walking in, catching them mid-laugh, only for her to act like I was the problem. A part of me wanted to turn around, march back in, demand answers. Another part was just tired. Bone-deep tired. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the lights inside were off. Sophie hadn't beaten me home yet. I sat there in the dark, rain tapping the roof, until headlights swept across the yard. She parked, took her time gathering her bags, then strolled up the steps as though the evening had been nothing more than errands. Inside, she peeled off her damp coat and set it on a chair. So, she said, tone clipped, was that fun for you? Following me around like a stalker? I stared at her, unable to speak for a moment. Fun? Watching my wife hold hands with another man? She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You barged in on a private conversation and made a scene. Do you have any idea how awkward that was for me? The sheer gall of it left me speechless. She poured herself a glass of wine, leaning against the counter like she was the injured party. Look, she said finally, I might have let things get blurry. But you've been so wrapped up in work for months. I needed someone who actually sees me. Her words sliced through me. There was no apology, no attempt to fix what she'd done, just blame carefully laid at my feet. I realized then that I could spend years twisting myself into knots, trying to meet her shifting expectations, and it would never be enough. I told her I needed space. She laughed, bitter and sharp. What, you're going to run off and sulk? Grow up, Mark. That night I slept in the guest room. Lying there in the dark, listening to rain patter against the window, I felt something new beneath the anger and grief, a fragile clarity. I couldn't control whether Sophie wanted to be faithful or honest. The only thing I could control was how much more of myself I was willing to lose to her lies. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew this much: the man who sat quietly doubting his own instincts was gone. The next steps had to be about reclaiming some dignity, even if it meant letting go of everything else. Morning light seeped through the blinds, pale and cold, and I woke up with the taste of last night's arguments still in my mouth. Sophie was already up, clattering around the kitchen as if nothing had happened. I lay there in the guest bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, realizing I couldn't keep drifting from one explosion to the next. If I didn't set a course, she'd keep spinning stories and I'd keep chasing ghosts. I showered, dressed, and walked into the kitchen. She barely glanced up from her phone. Coffee's on, she said, voice smooth, as if the night before had been a dream. That calmness, so deliberate, gave me more resolve than any shouting match could. While she scrolled, I quietly pulled a few important folders from the office: mortgage papers, bank statements, my passport. I wasn't planning to vanish, but I needed to know that if this marriage blew up completely, I wouldn't be left scrambling. I slipped the files into a messenger bag and left for work early. At lunch, I met my brother at a small diner. I hadn't told him much before, now the whole story poured out: the fitting room, the cafe, the texts, her defiance. He didn't interrupt. When I finally stopped talking, he said, "You don't need to make every decision today. But you do need to protect yourself and decide where your line is." That night, I started a new email account, forwarding screenshots and photos to a place Sophie couldn't access. I called a counselor, booked an appointment, and even drafted a short note for myself: "I am not crazy. I heard her. I saw her. My feelings are real." It might sound silly, but after weeks of gaslighting, I needed something solid to hold on to. Sophie, meanwhile, floated through the evening as though we were on a sitcom, wineglass in hand, feet tucked under her on the sofa, commenting on a reality show. When she finally looked up, she said, "You're awfully quiet tonight." Still sulking? The casual mockery confirmed what I already suspected: she wasn't going to offer honesty or remorse. Later, lying awake, I thought about what I wanted my life to look like. Not just survival, but peace. A space where I didn't have to inspect every laugh or phone notification for clues. The more I pictured it, the clearer it became: I couldn't build that kind of life while Sophie kept rewriting reality. By the time I drifted off, I wasn't sure yet if I'd leave or if there was any hope of repair, but I finally had a plan: gather facts, get support, and stop letting her steer the story. For the first time in weeks, sleep came without the jagged edge of panic. By the end of that week, I was done living in limbo. Every moment around Sophie felt like standing in smoke, eyes watering, lungs tight, waiting for air that never came. I knew I had to make a call, even if it hurt. Saturday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling between my palms. Sophie drifted in wearing a silky robe, scrolling her phone. She didn't even say good morning before she poured herself juice. I watched her for a moment, wondering if she ever thought about the damage behind her calm facade. "I want to talk," I said finally. She glanced up, eyebrows arched. "About what now? Another conspiracy?" "No. About us." I slid a stack of papers across the table, printouts of the texts, the cafe receipt, the photo I'd taken through the window. Her eyes skimmed them, then flicked back to me with a cold steadiness. "So you've been snooping and playing paparazzi." She set the papers aside like they were junk mail. "What exactly do you expect me to say?" "I expect you to be honest," I replied, voice low. "I saw you with him. I know what's going on." For a heartbeat, her mask slipped. She looked small, almost human. Then she laughed, brittle as glass. "Fine. Yes, I messed up. But you weren't exactly husband of the year, Mark. Always buried in work, leaving me to rot. Maybe if you'd noticed me, none of this would have happened." The words landed heavy, but not the way she intended. I felt something inside me solidify, an understanding that no matter how she spun it, her betrayal was a choice, not my failing. "I can take responsibility for being busy," I said quietly. "But I won't take the blame for you lying, hiding, and kissing someone else." She looked away, jaw tight. "So what, you're just going to walk out?" "I'm going to step back," I said. "I'm staying at my brother's for a while. I'll talk to a counselor, figure out what I actually want. Maybe we try therapy later, maybe we don't, but I can't stay here pretending this isn't real." For once, she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, arms crossed, staring at the floor. I packed a small duffel, grabbed the folder of documents, and paused at the door. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon, the same way it always had, but the warmth was gone. As I closed the door behind me, I felt the sting of loss, but also a fragile relief, like stepping out of a room where someone had been slowly turning off the oxygen. Whatever came next, at least I wasn't suffocating anymore. A week later, I sat at my brother's kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling between my hands, and finally felt the kind of quiet that doesn't come from avoidance. It was the kind of silence that leaves room for your own thoughts, the kind that lets you breathe. I kept replaying the moment I walked out of the house. For so long I'd been afraid of making that move, terrified that leaving, even temporarily, would make everything final. But the truth is, the damage was already done. Walking away just let me stop bleeding into someone else's lies. The hardest thing to face wasn't Sophie's affair. It was realizing how small I'd made myself, trying not to see it. I had bent reality to protect a version of us that no longer existed, doubting my own senses just to avoid admitting the fracture was real. Now, with distance, I can see that betrayal doesn't only break trust in someone else, it chips away at trust in yourself. That's the piece you have to fight hardest to reclaim. I've started therapy, not to untangle her reasons, but to remind myself of mine, why I value honesty, why I deserve peace. I don't know if Sophie and I will ever sit in a counselor's office together. If we do, it will only be because she's ready to own what she's done without blaming shadows. And if that day never comes, I'll still be okay. To anyone reading this who's stuck in that fog of suspicion and doubt, believe what you see. If someone constantly forces you to choose between your instincts and their excuses, choose yourself. Protect your peace early, it's a lot easier than trying to rebuild it after you've been hollowed out. Thanks to everyone who read through this story and offered advice. Putting this into words has been its own kind of rescue. Take care of your hearts, trust your gut, and don't be afraid to leave rooms where the air has gone bad. Life is too short to keep breathing in someone else's smoke.